Let's talk agent skills. And I know you know what an agent skill is. The problem just is that many people are not really using agent skills correctly, or at least not to their full potential. Now, as mentioned, I know you know what an agent skill is. It's a skill MD file with a description that helps an agent activate that skill in the right moment, and then it's your actual skill instructions. The content you'll inject into your coding agent or into whatever agent you're using to make it do certain things the way you want it to. Because a skill is, of course, in the end, just a prompt, just some extra context you're sending to your agent to execute a certain task. And it's worth noting, and that's already the first thing some people don't really realize, that a skill is not necessarily just a skill.md file. For some skills, that may be all you need. For many skills, you also may have extra references, extra deep dive resources that can be activated by the agent when needed, because those skills, as you probably know, are of course all about incremental discovery. So the idea is that this entire skill MD file is not even loaded, but instead just the metadata stuff here. That is loaded into every agent session. Then, because of this description, an agent may decide to activate a skill. Then the rest of the skill MD file is read. And then in that skill MD file, you can point at other references so that those are activated when needed. Many people know that. Fewer people know that skills can have more than references. They can have assets, which could be blueprints. Like here, my create plan skill, for example, has a plan blueprint I like my agents to use when they craft plans. And by the way, all these skills are publicly available, all the skills I have here, and I'll link them below. So that's a thing. And you can also have scripts. For example, I have a generate image skill, which does what the name implies. It helps me generate images with help of AI. And I have a script in there, a TypeScript script, which uses fal, the fal service. Fal.ai is a service which offers various AI models through an API so that you can send your requests there to generate images, text, audio, videos, whatever. This is my image generation skill, so it's only about those models. And indeed, I have GPT image 2 hard-coded here in my case here for the only image model I want to use. Of course, I could change this. And therefore, here I have a skill with a script that generates images. Now, you could ask, why not just a script? Why burn those tokens and add that random nature to it when it could be just a script? And that is a good question, because I think some things that people give you as skills could just be scripts, but some things should really be both. For example, here I have a script for the deterministic part of this skill, for sending the request, handling the response, extracting the image, saving the image. That's handled by the script. But I have a skill so that it, for example, translates my vague instruction of I need an image of a bicycle in the rain to a proper prompt based on the instructions in that skill here, and that it then invokes that script for me. So a little bit of utility there. I could write that prompt myself, but that's the nice thing. I can get the best of both worlds. And that's a good example for a skill that is, of course, not related to programming, but just a general utility skill. Now, in general, agent skills are there for two main reasons. And the first reason is that they can close a knowledge gap. These models have some knowledge from their training data and their fine-tuning, the reinforcement learning, of course. That is the knowledge that's baked into the model. Then they can, of course, get extra knowledge from the context you give to them, from your code base, from your prompt, from any web research they may be doing. But then you can also have your own skills that add more knowledge about certain tasks, knowledge about certain domains you may be working on. For example, if I'm working in a project where I use the effect library, which is a library that's not as baked into those models maybe, where it hasn't seen as much code as it has for other libraries, I'd like to build a skill for that. And I do that with help of AI. I ask AI to do some web research, to dive into the docs, and to gather knowledge about the effect library. I also may give it some specific resources, some specific URLs I wanted to definitely visit because I know they contain important knowledge I want to have in the skill. But then I let AI gather that knowledge and convert it to a skill. And to help with that skill conversion, or in general with creating skills, because I like AI to create skills, I then fine-tune them myself, but I like AI to use, or I like to use AI for creating those skills. I have a create skill, which basically encodes the best practices and patterns I want AI to use when crafting skills. But then I'm happy to use AI to, for example, create such a knowledge skill that adds knowledge and makes it easy for AI to, for example, activate that skill whenever it's working on effect code or in an effect code base, to make sure that it's properly using all those features according to the official docs, and it doesn't have to constantly reach out to those docs over and over again. That's the idea. So bridging that knowledge gap is, of course, one important area where you may want to use a skill. Another important area is the execution gap. Knowledge is one thing, but of course, these models also have certain behaviors, certain ways of tackling certain tasks, and that may often be what you want, and sometimes, or maybe also often, depending on the domain, they may know better than you, but sometimes you know how certain work needs to be done or how something needs to be executed, and that is where you can also use a skill. For example, again, that create plan skill I already showed you before. I like my coding agents to create plans for the tasks they tackle. Now, creating a plan could, of course, be done with plan mode, and you could leverage that depending on your coding agent. But for example, I'm using the Pi coding agent, which doesn't have a plan mode. And even if I'm using something like Claude Code, I nowadays tend to not use any plan mode built in. Instead, I use such a skill. Implicitly, because this skill, due to its description, should get used when I ask the user, the agent, to create a plan. That's in the description, and that works very reliably in my experience. So what happens then is I ask the agent to create a plan, and it will activate that skill. Now, in that skill, I have details on what creating a plan means. It includes stuff like research, that it should perform research, that it should delegate to sub-agents, and I have dedicated skills for that as well, on how to use sub-agents, how to split work in general, and then also in the Pi coding agent, because again, that's the coding agent I'm mostly using. Then I also have instructions on how to plan. So I have a template in there, as I showed you before, how a plan should look like, because I review those plans. I want to have a clear structure, and it should always be the same structure. I have all of that encoded in here. I also have a review step encoded in here, so that the plan I see has already been reviewed. Now, when it comes to that reviewing, I have a dedicated skill, because reviews of plans of code also should follow certain rules and patterns. And in that code review skill, I, for example, also make it clear that tasks should be delegated, should be split, and sub-agents should be used, also to keep the main context window clean. And I also have rules regarding the scoring of findings, and that I don't want to have all findings be reflected in my plan or in the review that's being generated. Instead, it should judge, and it should, for example, avoid adding more and more complexity. For that, I also have a decomplex skill here, which is all about defining what too much complexity means and how to check for complexity. And in all those skills, I make it clear that the user, so I, should be asked if it's not clear if something's too complex or a real issue. So I have multiple layers here so that I build a system that works well for me, and that, for example, for planning, where that reviewing triggers all these other skills, I get a plan that is executable for the most part, that has been reviewed and that is in a good shape. That's what I mean with the execution gap. Of course, the model can create a plan without my instructions, But in my experience, I get better results with those extra skills that make it very clear how I want it to work on a plan. Now, could I just put that into a prompt instead? Sure, but I would be doing that over and over again. And that's in general a good advice. If you find yourself asking for the same stuff over and over again, or complaining about the same errors over and over again, put it in a skill. And also important, write your own skills. You can absolutely use my skills or the skills by Matt Pocock or any other skills you find out there. Nothing wrong with them. There are great skills out there, and they're especially great starting points. But you should refine them, make them yours, and also build your own skills for your own workflows and the problems you're facing with agents, because everybody works a bit different, and something that works well for me doesn't have to work well for you. That's why it's so important to write your own skills. And it is simple. A good skill really is just about having a good description so that it's getting activated in the right moments, and a lean, actionable body. Keep your skills lean. I prefer these bullet points here. That is not necessary, of course, but avoid having a lot of prose in there. If you're using AI to write skills, which again, I do too, make sure you really nudge it towards that style, or towards some style that's not overly complex and long, because some AI models tend to give you very thorough and bloated skills. And for one, that is all tokens you're paying for. That is all something that pollutes the context. And therefore, because of that pollution especially, it leads, or it can lead to worse results. Keep your skills focused and lean. Use AI to build them, but then dive into, spend that time to improve that skill, because that skill is going to get used over and over again. So don't be lazy there. Really make it a good skill and tweak it, adjust it to your liking, to your requirements. Also, don't treat skills as a static thing. It's not. It should evolve over time, because everything else evolves. The models change, and some models suddenly are way more aggressive or verbose than other models. So the skills that worked for other models don't necessarily work for a newer model. That's one thing. The coding agent harnesses change too. The tools they may have change. The system prompt that may implicitly be added, that changes. And you change. The way you work changes. A year ago, we were all writing way more code than we do now. We're also changing how and how much code we read. So of course, our skills also need to evolve. You could also consider adding an improve skill to your skills, so that your agents can automatically improve skills based on certain rules you define whenever they frequently get something wrong, or you frequently correct them on something that was actually encoded in a skill. So these are all things you should consider doing. A skill you installed half a year ago is not necessarily useful anymore. Evolve it, throw it away maybe if it doesn't get the job done anymore, and build your own skills. Don't just collect skills created by others. Also be aware of the fact that I would say there are 4 main types of skills, though of course, obviously, they also kind of overlap. We have the domain knowledge skill I already talked about, which is, for example, that effect skill I like to add to a project, to have certain domain-specific knowledge that matters to a project in a skill, so that the agent doesn't have to make requests over and over again. That can be useful. I have my workflow skills, like that create plan skill I showed you, for workflows I repeat over and over again, where I also don't want to repeat myself and where I want to have a clear structure. Then I have companion skills, with which I mean skills that explain the usage of certain tools to an agent. For example, I have a use Pi sub-agents skill, which is a skill, as the name suggests, fine-tuned for working with Pi, the Pi coding agent. And that skill has a script which is there to spin up and control sub-agents through Pi. I could be using an extension, I'm using a skill instead. And then that skill explains how to use that script. So of course it's kind of like that generate image script, but it still is a skill that explains how to use that Pi coding agent in which a model may be running and how to use it to, for example, work with sub-agents. Another example could be for any other CLI you install on your system, which you want to explain to an agent. And the last type of skill, at least for me, are executables, as I like to call them, which would, for example, be that generate image skill. Or maybe even more than that, for me, it's that a VPS setup hardening skill I have here. This skill has a bunch of scripts and a bunch of configuration templates, for example, and I use this skill to, for example, configure a new VPS. I could do that all with just scripts, but it does actually require some decisions here and there, some checks that should be performed, and it's nice to have an agent do that. Obviously, everybody has to decide for themselves if they want to let an agent roam freely on a VPS, but I have had good experience with that. I'm using that skill, for example, to execute that workflow of setting up a new VPS together with an agent. And I describe how that works. I have a clearly described workflow here, and then I have all these hard-coded scripts and configs. And for all these things, agent skills can be really useful and can be considered. And that, therefore, leaves only two remaining questions. One question is where to put those skills, because you can install them globally on your system or locally per project. That, of course, should be relatively easy to answer. If you have something like my create plan skill, which applies to many projects, to all the projects I'm working on, it should be a global skill. The generate image skill is a global skill because I may want to generate an image from anywhere on the system. On the other hand, that effect skill with the effect library knowledge, that would be per project because it doesn't add any value if it's sitting there globally. Because all the global skills, of course, at least their metadata, their description, they are always loaded into all your sessions. And it's not just about the tokens that are burned by that. That's not too bad. All these tools, which skills in the end are, simply can lead to worse model performance the more you have of them. And therefore, I try to keep my global skills as lean as possible. In general, I try to have as few skills as possible, and I definitely put everything into a project that can be in a project. Well, and the other question is, what would you put into AgentsMD or ClaudeMD? And for me, these files should be super lean. I really only put general instructions in there that steer the behavior of the model. Something like keep your responses short, or don't add any legacy or fallback code, because models, or at least some models, love to do that. They don't delete code, they just add layer on layer on layer, and having such instructions in AgentsMD can help a bit at least. Now, why not make it a skill? Because a skill must be activated. And I don't want to hope for that to be activated. If I have hard rules that matter to all the models and all the agents, I put them into a global AgentsMD file, because you can have global agents and ClaudeMD files too, not just project-specific ones. And then they will be loaded for every session and I'm good to go. And that's the simple differentiation here for me. Skills are like tools, like extra patterns or pieces of knowledge that matter often, but not always. If something does matter always, it goes into AgentsMD or ClaudeMD. Yeah, and that is really how you should be using skills, in my opinion.